I was jolted awake by the guttural roar of an orc and the thunderous crash of something heavy hitting metal. This is how dawn breaks in an orc Waaagh camp, violently and far too early. No gentle sunrise or cock's crow here, just the ear-splitting racket of greenskins brawling over breakfast. My heart pounds in my chest as I snap to consciousness, adrenaline surging before my eyes even open fully. Lying on a pile of filthy rags that serve as my bed, I instinctively curl up tighter, bracing for whatever fresh horror morning will bring. A ragged canvas lean-to overhead barely shields me from the oily smoke already belching from orc campfires. The air reeks of burned fungus, unwashed orc, and the metallic tang of dried blood. I've learned that in this camp, you wake up fast or you don't wake up at all. Sure enough, an impatient boot, steel-capped and the size of a small boulder, slams into the makeshift cage where I'm kept at night. The whole structure rattles and I bite back a yelp. Showing fear only encourages them. Through the slats, a red-eyed orc knob glowers at me. His skin is a sickly, mottled green under the morning light, crisscrossed with scars and fresh bruises from last night's brawl. "Get up, you lazy runt," he snarls in a voice like grinding rocks. Spittle flecks hit my face. I scramble upright at once, muscles protesting after a night spent on cold mud and stone. Another day begins in this nightmare. As I crawl out of my cage, I make sure to keep my head down and my hands visible. Any sudden move might spook an orc into lashing out. Around me, the camp is coming alive in its typical chaotic fashion. Orcs are everywhere, dozens of hulking brutes milling about or charging from one spot to another with no rhyme or reason apparent to anyone but them. Immediately to my left, two orc boys are wrestling in the dirt over what looks like a squirming sack, probably breakfast squigs. They howl and curse at each other in their brutish accent, sounding more like angry beasts than sentient beings. One manages to rip the sack from the other and, with a triumphant "Waaagh," smashes his forehead into his opponent's nose. There's a crunch, a spurt of dark blood, and the loser is sent reeling, roaring with laughter even as he topples through a stack of scrap metal. Violence is the orc version of morning calisthenics. Around here, a broken nose is just a friendly greeting to the day. I skitter past the brawling pair, careful not to draw attention. The ground underfoot is a churned mess of mud, old bones, and shell casings. Already the rising sun, a dim red orb struggling through the perpetual haze of smoke, illuminates the detritus of last night's revels. I can make out charred remains of squigs from a cook fire, and puddles of what I pray is just spilled fungus beer. A buzzing cloud of flies rises as an orc kicks aside a decaying human arm left from some gruesome game. I swallow the bile in my throat and remind myself not to react. Showing disgust here is like painting a target on your back. My first task of the day is the same as every day: survive long enough to see the next. That usually starts with doing whatever disgusting chore the orcs bark at me. I'm a human slave in this camp, one of the few still alive. Why they haven't killed me yet is a mystery even the Emperor couldn't answer. Maybe they keep me around for laughs, or maybe I'm just useful enough not to smash to pulp. Either way, I know my life hangs by a thread of orc whim, and that thread could snap any second. An ear-splitting horn sounds from the center of camp, a deep bellow from a hollowed-out beast horn, amplified by crude metal speakers. It's the morning assembly call, as if these creatures could organize anything that's civilized. Still, the sound triggers a frenzy of activity. Dozens of orcs begin lumbering toward the central clearing where a totem pole of scrap and skulls stands as a rally point. I shuffle along behind a group of grots, tiny, sniveling greenskins even lower on the ladder than me, who scurry to avoid being trampled by their larger kin. One unfortunate grot isn't quick enough and gets booted high into the air by an irritated knob. The poor little creature lands with a wet thump somewhere out of sight, and a chorus of raucous laughter erupts. I grimace but keep moving. Better a grot than me. In the clearing, the orc mob gathers around their boss. The Warboss, a giant even among orcs, stands atop a heap of scrap metal that serves as his stage. He's a mountain of muscle and crude cyborg augmentations, one beady red eye glaring out from a face covered in metal plates riveted directly into his thick skull. In one massive paw, he grips a roaring chainsaw-like axe. They call it a chain chopper. And in the other, a crude pistol nearly the size of a cannon. He raises the pistol and fires into the sky just to quiet the crowd, because nothing gets an orc's attention like random gunfire. The shot echoes across the camp, and gradually the rowdy mass settles down to a dull roar of grunts. I sidle toward the back, trying to be as inconspicuous as possible among the throng of grots and a few other human slaves dragged forward to hear the daily pronouncements. My mouth is dry and my hands tremble, but I clasp them together to hide the shake. The Warboss's single red bionic eye sweeps over the assembly like a searchlight. Even from yards away, I can feel the sheer presence of him, a predator among predators. My stomach knots with fear that he'll notice me, single me out for some cruel example. Instead, he begins to speak, if you can call the avalanche of shouted threats and boasts that addressing his boys. "Listen up, ya scabby gits," the Warboss roars. His breath wafts over the crowd, stinking of raw meat and gasoline. "Today's the day we get stuck in good and proper. We's gonna stomp dose humies flat and take all the shiny bits for ourselves. Waaagh." At the mention of us humies being stomped flat, I feel a chill despite the warm, smoky air. So the rumors were true. They're planning an attack, maybe on an Imperial outpost or a nearby city. The specifics are lost in his crude speech, but the intent is clear as day. Murder, mayhem, and a good fight. The crowd of orcs goes wild at his words. They pump their fists, tusks bared in feral grins. A unified shout of "Waaagh!" rattles my bones. It's not just a war cry. It's like a psychic exclamation that ripples through the air. My ears ring with it. As the Warboss continues his tirade, promising first pick of loot and plenty of bloodshed to his boys, I take stock of the scene around me. Orc society, if one can call it that, is on full display. The biggest, meanest brutes stand closest to their boss, pounding their chests or revving chainswords in anticipation. These are the knobs, the lieutenants, each as ugly and vicious as a battle-scarred grox. Further out are the rank-and-file orc boys, bouncing on the balls of their feet, eager to charge and kill something, anything. Among them weave a few oddball figures. Mech boys and pain boys. I spot the camp's mech, recognizable by the array of tools, hoses, and sparking contraptions on his back. He's probably mentally tuning up all the ramshackle vehicles and guns for the coming fight. Off to one side, the pain boy, an orc medic, though calling that butcher a medic is generous, is arguing with a one-armed orc about whether he needs to amputate more of the limb. The one-armed orc seems oddly excited by the idea of a cybernetic replacement. Only in an orc camp would losing an arm be considered a lucky break for getting a loud, clanking new toy attached. I don't dare move a muscle as the Warboss's speech reaches a climax. He grabs a struggling shape from behind him, one of the other human prisoners, a man I recognize vaguely as a PDF trooper from some regiment that got overrun. The poor soul is battered and wide-eyed with terror. Before any of us can even blink, the Warboss lifts him high and bellows, "This here is what we do to humies." Then he brings the screaming man down over his knee with a sickening crack that echoes across the clearing. The scream cuts off abruptly. I flinch, my nails digging into my palms to keep from crying out. The camp erupts into cheers as the Warboss tosses the limp body aside like a broken rag doll. I force myself to stare straight ahead, jaw clenched so hard I taste blood. That could have been me. Throne of Terror. That still might be me later. The assembly breaks up in a frenzy of excitement. Orcs rush off in every direction to prepare for the promised carnage. Weapons need checking, vehicles need fueling, or more accurately, need prodding until the engines stop exploding. And personal grudges need settling before the larger battle. In the sudden chaotic dispersal, no one pays attention as I sidestep away to avoid being crushed underfoot. The dust of the clearing is kicked up into a fog by so many heavy boots. I cough, wave it away, and try to steady my breathing. My mind is racing. War is coming, maybe as soon as today. If the orcs roll out, what happens to me? Do they bring their slaves along as baggage porters, or do they just kill us for sport before they leave? Neither option is appealing. My hands are still shaking uncontrollably, so I hide them by tucking my arms around my torso. I need to focus on staying useful for as long as possible. A sharp prod in my back jolts me out of my thoughts. I yelp and twist around to find a grot there, the little green runt brandishing a pointed stick. "Move it, Humie," it snaps in a reedy voice, black eyes glaring from under a comically oversized helmet, clearly scavenged from a human child's toy. It must have been sent by one of the orcs to round up slaves for chores. I've no desire to get stabbed by a glorified goblin, so I shuffle obediently where it herds me. The grot leads me and two other miserable-looking humans toward the scrap piles on the east side of camp. The scrapyard is a sprawling heap of twisted metal wreckage from vehicles and war machines, shattered plasteel panels, and junk of every description that the mech boy has deemed promising bits for later. It's also where cast-off body parts end up when the orcs are done looting corpses, an arm here, a severed head there, mostly picked clean by scavengers or taken as trophies. The stench is overpowering. Rust, oil, and rot, all blended into a gut-churning perfume under the strengthening sunlight. Our task soon becomes clear. The mech boy is up on a tilted crane arm, cackling madly as he directs a crew of grots in welding armor plates onto the side of an orc war truck. The vehicle itself is parked haphazardly next to a stack of explosive barrels, a fact that sends a spike of fear through me as I pass. One stray spark, and we'll all be red mist. A couple of orc boys stand nearby, arguing over whether painting the truck red now will make it go faster, or if it won't count until it's moving. Orc logic is an enigma. "Red uns go faster," one insists, jabbing a clawed finger at a dented fender. "Nah, that only works once you're on the move," the other retorts. Honestly, in this insane universe, it might even be true that paint color matters. Orcs certainly believe it does. The grot prods us forward to a pile of scrap that looks half as tall as a hab block. Boss says sort out the shooty bits from the not shooty bits, it squeaks at us. Then it adds with a nasty little grin, revealing needle-like teeth. "And if you find anything explodey, don't shake it too much if you like your arms on." With that helpful advice, the grot scampers off, leaving us slaves to our toil. I exchange a quick glance with the others. Two women, both covered in grime, their eyes sunken with exhaustion and fear. No words are spoken. We learned long ago that chatter draws unwanted attention. We silently set to work, sifting through the junk. My fingers are soon coated in rust and something sticky that I'd rather not identify. Every piece of scrap I pick up threatens tetanus or worse, Jagged metal edges, broken blades, chunks of crude orc firearms that might still be loaded. Carefully, I set aside anything that looks like part of a gun or ammunition that goes in the shooty bits pile. Everything else is not shooty bits, which basically means it'll be hammered into armor plating or welded onto vehicles arbitrarily. Time loses meaning as we labor under the baleful gaze of occasional passing orcs. The sun climbs higher, baking the ground and us with it. Sweat mixes with dirt on my skin, forming an itchy mud. Flies buzz incessantly around my head, drawn by the scent of filth and dried blood that seems embedded in my very pores by now. I don't dare swat them too obviously. An orc might think I'm slacking. At one point, a grot overseer swings by to inspect our progress. He picks up a rusty bolt gun casing from our sorted heap and eyes it critically. We all tense, afraid he'll find something to complain about. Instead, the grot seems satisfied enough. He spits a glistening green gob on one woman's boot for good measure, then wanders off, likely to report that the Humies are still working and not dead yet. Around midday, the noise in the camp swells even louder, a feat I didn't think possible. The Warboss's earlier speech has every orc in high gear for the coming Waaagh. From our position at the scrapyard, I have a decent view of much of the camp. It's utter mayhem. Orc boys are testing their guns, which means shooting at random targets. Tin cans, a rusted barrel, the occasional luckless grot riding on the back of a squig. The crack of firearms and the deeper boom of something exploding make an almost rhythmic backdrop to the day. My ears have grown numb to the constant gunfire. It's become a horrid kind of music in the background. Nearby, two orcs are arguing over a particularly large rocket launcher. One claims it's his because he drew blood on the last raid first. The other insists he found it in the loot fair and square. The disagreement is settled the way all orc disputes are, with fists and blades. They set upon each other with gleeful fury, whooping and cackling as they trade blows that would pulp a human skull. Within moments, one orc drives his knife into the other's gut. Instead of collapsing, the wounded orc just headbutts his rival in return, both of them now bleeding profusely and seemingly enjoying it. Eventually, the one with the gut wound starts slipping in his own spilled entrails and keels over. The victor picks up the fallen rocket launcher, seemingly forgetting he has a blade sticking out of his abdomen. He holds the weapon aloft and cheers, "Got me rocket launcher, Waaagh!" To my astonishment, the injured orc then yanks the knife out of himself and staggers away in search of the pain boy, leaving a trail of dark blood. He's laughing the whole time as if it's all a grand joke. The sheer resilience and madness of orcs never ceases to horrify me. I force myself to look back down at the scrap in front of me. If I stare too long at their antics, either I'll catch unwanted attention or I'll lose my grip on sanity. Possibly both. I keep my head down and try to focus on the scrap in front of me, pretending nothing else exists. That fragile moment of relative peace is abruptly shattered by a sudden explosion from across the camp, near the mech boys' workshop. I later pieced together what happened. Apparently, the mech boys' attempt to supercharge the engine of a warbike went a bit too well, and the whole contraption blew sky high, taking a sizable chunk of the workshop and a few onlookers with it. I see the aftermath through the haze, a plume of greasy black smoke rising, orcs bellowing in either panic or glee. With orcs, it's hard to tell. The mech boy himself stumbles out of the wreckage, charred from head to toe, still alive and laughing as flames lick at his coat. He's praising his gods between bouts of hacking coughs, shouting about how Gork and Mork must have loved that blast, her. Only orcs would treat a lethal accident as a blessing from their deities of war and destruction. The commotion provides a distraction, and I take the chance to slip away from the scrap heap for a moment. The other remaining slave is gone. Emperor knows what happened to her. With no immediate taskmaster in sight, I edge backwards into the shadows behind a pile of twisted metal. My heart hammers. Skiving off work in an orc camp is a deadly gamble, but if I don't snatch moments like this to breathe, I'll go insane. Or collapse, which is just as fatal here. Hidden from the main thoroughfares of the camp, I hunker down and cautiously nibble on a hard ration bar I had managed to salvage earlier. It's bland and dry, but to me it tastes like a feast. I have to force myself to eat slowly. Gulping it down could make me sick after so long on scant food. As I chew, I observe the camp's chaos from my little hideaway. Orc camps are a frenzy of activity before a battle. It's almost like watching an anthill, if the ants were 6-foot green monsters that occasionally ate each other. Columns of black smoke mark where mechs are tuning up war machines. Big clanking tanks and trucks belching fumes, painted in garish colors with teeth and flames. Orcs congregate in mobs, comparing weapons, bragging about past fights. One group is chanting a crude orc war song. Smash 'em, bash 'em, break dat line. Stomp 'em, crump 'em, zog 'em, fine. It's an awful stomping rhythm, punctuated by the thud of boots and random gunshots into the air. I catch sight of a peculiar figure swaying amid a cluster of painted bone totems. Ah, the weird boy. Every Waaagh has one or two, an orc psyker channeling the collective battle fervor of the greenskins into bizarre psychic effects. This one is daubed in tribal glyphs, spittle flying from his lips as he mutters and occasionally screeches like an epileptic vulture. The other orcs keep a wary distance, a rare show of caution, likely because they've seen what happens when a weird boy gets too excited and the Waaagh energy discharges. No one wants their head to spontaneously explode, unless it's to get out of boring duties, perhaps. I've heard tales of weird boys who can melt enemy brains or make orcs even more berserk and impervious to pain. Part of me wonders, in a detached way, what it's like when the Waaagh overtakes them in battle. Not that I ever want to be close enough to find out. As I rest there in the relative quiet behind the scrap, I permit myself one brief indulgence, remembering life before this. It's dangerous to dwell on memories. They make the present torture harder to bear. But sometimes I can't help it. I think of my home hive city, gray and polluted as it was, but peaceful compared to this madness. I was a nobody conscript in the Planetary Defense Force, had a family somewhere in the lower Habs. Are they even alive now? Did they die when the orcs invaded? I'll likely never know. The orcs swept over our defenses in a tide of green and gunfire. I was knocked out by a shell blast, half buried in rubble. Maybe that's why they found me alive and decided I was a useful spare part. Useful. That's my entire existence now. A tool and a target. I clench my jaw. If I allow myself any hope, it's that the Imperial Guard might attack and wipe out this camp. But with my luck, they'd simply bombard it to oblivion with me still inside. Perhaps that would be a mercy. I finish the meager ration, savoring every crumb. Gathering my wits, I know I have to return to visibility before someone notices I'm missing. The penalty for sneaking off is summary execution or being thrown into a pit fight, and I'd prefer neither. Wiping the sweat and grime from my brow, I steel myself and creep out from behind the scrap pile, merging back into the flow of the camp. I don't get far before a harsh voice barks my way. "Oi, you!" I freeze. An orc knob, one of the Warboss's bigger thugs, beckons me over with a curled finger the size of a ham hock. He's standing by a row of caged squigs and holding an enormous ladle dripping with what looks like blood and gristle. "Get over here, runt," he snarls. I shuffle over quickly, head bowed, mind racing through possible tasks, feeding squigs, maybe cleaning out their pens. The knob thrusts the gore-coated ladle at my chest, nearly knocking me over. "The squigs are starving. Feed 'em," he orders, as though it's the most obvious thing in the world. He points a thick finger at a crude trough that runs along the line of cages. I nod mutely. The ladle's handle is sticky in my hands. It's heavy iron, and the slimy mess on it drips onto my feet, making me gag from the smell. Half-congealed offal and rotten meat. Squig stew. The knob loses interest in me immediately, turning away to bellow at a couple of boys who appear to be arguing over boots. With trembling resolve, I approach the squig cages. Squigs are basically living stomachs with teeth. Squirmy, ravenous creatures that orcs raise for food, weapons, or sometimes just amusement. These cages hold the eating kind, I think. They are smaller and not outfitted with explosives or ridden into battle. Still, each is the size of a dog and twice as mean. They hurl themselves at the cage bars, snapping and snarling as I come near with their breakfast. I gingerly dip the ladle into a nearby bubbling cauldron of what must be more squig stew and pour it into the trough. Immediately, the squigs in the first cage shove their bulbous bodies against one another to lap at the vile slurry. I move down the line, ladling more into each section of the trough. One particularly impatient squig-a mottled red brute with one milky eye lunges and almost snags the ladle itself, nearly yanking it from my grip. I jerk back just in time and it settles for the slop, slurping noisily. "Easy there," I mutter under my breath, though Emperor knows why I bother being polite to a squig. While feeding the last cage, I become aware of a looming presence at my side. I glance warily over and my blood runs cold. It's the camp's runtherd, the orc, whose unenviable job is to manage grots and squigs. He's an ugly brute with a face like a leather sack of broken bones, and he's got a long barbed whip coiled in one hand. He must have noticed me doing his job. My mouth goes dry as I quickly dump the final ladle of stew and step back. "Just feeding them like Knobthrak told me, boss," I say quickly, voice trembling despite my efforts to sound respectful. The runtherd snorts and snatches the ladle from me. He eyes me with absolute disdain. "You missed a bit," he growls, pointing at a corner of the trough that I hadn't filled. Without warning, he swings his whip. Agony lances across my back as the lash bites into me. I cry out and drop to one knee. The pain is fiery, my shirt torn and wetness already seeping where flesh opened. "Lazy Humie," he spits, as if I've personally offended him by existing. Biting back a sea, I force myself up and quickly scoop one last ladle of the foul stew into the mist corner. The squigs squeal with delight. "Now get out of me sight," the runtherd snarls. I limp away as fast as I can without breaking into a run. Running might incite them to chase, and that never ends well. My back burns with each step. I'm just grateful he didn't decide to feed me to the squigs. I've seen that happen before. As I put distance from the squig pens, wiping a trickle of blood off my lip, I nearly collide with a pair of grots, struggling to carry a massive buzzsaw blade between them. They squeak in alarm, teetering under the weight. I mutter a quick apology and sidestep them. A mere human apologizing to grots, if my former comrades could see me now. But pride has no place here. Humility and invisibility are all that keep me alive. The sun is dipping low now, casting a grimy orange glow through the perpetual smoke that blankets the camp. Even with war preparations in full swing, orcs have time for their nightly fun. I dread evenings most of all. With the day's work done, or as done as an orc ever bothers, the greenskins turn to feasting and brawling with renewed energy. A group of boys nearby have set up a crude spit over a fire, impaling what looks like a whole roast beast, perhaps a squiggeth calf or some unfortunate grox from a raided farm. The smell of charring meat mingles with the ever-present odors of promethium fumes and sweaty orc. It's an assault on the senses. The warband's drummers, if you can call banging on sheets of scrap metal drumming, begin pounding out a booming rhythm. The sound echoes, drawing more orcs towards the makeshift revelry area. I keep to the edges, staying just busy enough, moving a stack of firewood here, fetching a pail of fungus beer there, so that any passing knob assumes I'm on someone's orders. In truth, I'm trying to avoid becoming one of their amusements for the night. The orcs start guzzling from huge barrels of fungus brew, a noxious ale that smells like industrial runoff, but gets them roaring drunk and twice as violent. One of the barrels springs a leak under the rough handling, and several grots dive in to lap up the spilling foam before it's gone, until an orc boot sends them flying. A particularly large orc with a spiky helm. I recognize him as one of the knobs from earlier stands and makes a toast of sorts. To bigger fights and louder booms, Waaagh! He yells, sloshing half his mug as he swings it wide. The crowd answers with a unified Waaagh! And drinks deeply. Within minutes, the gathering descends into a riotous frenzy. Fueled by alcohol and anticipation of the coming battle, orcs begin pounding on each other's backs and shoulders, which quickly turns into outright punches and headbutts for sport. Two boys start an impromptu headbutting contest in the firelight, slamming their thick skulls together with wet cracks until one finally topples unconscious to general applause and derision. Another orc, perhaps inspired, fires his shooter at the sky as a form of drunken musical accompaniment, the bullets whizzing off into the dusk. The orc beside him, annoyed that nothing living was shot, roars and tackles the shooter, and soon they're rolling on the ground, biting and pummeling each other merrily. All the while, the drums pound and some orcs stomp their feet in time, chanting another of their senseless songs. Red uns go faster, red uns go faster. This seems half chant, half argument, as another faction responds with, Blue uns is luckier, blue uns is luckier. Naturally, this scholarly debate over paint color's merits devolves into a melee, with orcs from different clans whacking each other over the head to prove whose hue is best. Orc culture at its finest, scientific discourse delivered through the medium of headbutts. I find myself near the main fire, momentarily transfixed by the sight of that roasting meat turning on the spit. My stomach growls. When was the last time I had cooked meat? Hell, when was the last time I had more than moldy bread or raw squig? I catch myself edging forward without thinking, drawn by the smell of real food, and force myself to stop. Nothing is worth drawing an orc's attention. I take a few careful steps back into the shadows, away from the tempting glow of the fire and the rowdy cluster of orcs. Better to endure hunger than become tonight's entertainment. Eventually, exhaustion and drink begin to slow the revelry. The chaos dims to a dull rumble as one by one the greenskins either topple over where they stand or stagger off to find some place to pass out. Seizing the chance, I quietly slip away from the edge of the firelight and make my way toward the squalid little corner where the remaining slaves huddle at night. The ground there is cold and foul, but at least in the darkness I can curl up with a shred of safety, my presence hopefully forgotten in the gloom. A sudden commotion near the far gate catches my attention. Raised voices. I lift my head, heart skipping. It's not an alarm, more like an argument. In the dimness, I see the silhouette of two orc sentries, and between them, a smaller figure. A human? Curiosity gets the better of me, and I inch closer in the dark, staying low. They've caught a man, one of the slaves who must have tried to slip out under cover of night. I recognize his ragged outline. His name is Lawrence or Loritz, something like that. He's new, captured only a week or two ago. Poor fool must have thought this was his chance to escape. Now the two hulking orc guards drag him back into camp, toward the center where a large bonfire still crackles. They're making a spectacle of him. I squeeze my eyes shut, not wanting to see what comes next, but unable to block out the sounds. There's pleading at first, the man begging incoherently for mercy, promising them anything if they spare him. The orcs just howl with amusement. An idea is raised. Make an example for any other runty gits thinking of legging it. I peek and see the Warboss himself lumbering out of his tent, drawn by the ruckus. His massive frame looms as he approaches the cowering prisoner. With a cruel grin, he announces a late-night entertainment. They stake the man down in front of the bonfire, tie his limbs to 4 posts in the ground. My blood runs cold. I've heard of this orc game. They call it squig tug. Even some of the drunken orcs rouse to come watch, forming a ring with eager eyes. A pair of cage doors are thrown open, and 2 lean, feral squigs are let out, each hungry and snapping. The handlers goad them toward the tied man. One squig latches onto his left arm with powerful jaws. The other clamps onto his right. The man's scream is an unnatural, high-pitched wail that seems to go on forever. The orcs cheer and place bets, howling with laughter as the squigs start pulling. Blood sprays into the dirt. I can't watch. I clap my hands over my ears, tears streaming down my face, trying to drown out the horrific wet ripping sounds and the man's shrieks. Finally, with a sickening tear, the squigs rip his arms clean off. The crowd roars in delight as the squigs drag away their grisly prizes. I curl into a ball, facing away from the spectacle, shaking uncontrollably. This is life in an orc camp. This is the nightmare that repeats every day, every night, only varying in the particular flavor of brutality. When the orcs run out of proper enemies, they make do with whatever or whoever is at hand. I can't even summon any bile or anger at the poor fellow for trying to escape. Part of me envies him. His suffering is over now, horrific as it was. Mine continues. Eventually, the commotion fades. The orcs move on, some dragging what's left of the unfortunate soul away, perhaps to add his skull to the scrap totem, or to toss whatever remains to the squigs. Warboss returns to his hovel. The camp gradually settles into something resembling slumber, though quiet is never truly quiet here. There are always distant snores like growling beasts, or the crackle of embers, or some semi-conscious orc muttering about a fight in his sleep and punching the nearest body next to him. I exhale slowly and uncurl slightly from my fetal ball. Every muscle aches and my back throbs where the lash struck me. The dried blood on my skin has stuck my shirt to the wound, but I'm alive. By the Emperor's grace or the universe's cruel humor, I have survived another day in this forsaken place. As I lay my head on the least uncomfortable of my rags, I allow myself one final grim thought. How long can this possibly last? Sooner or later, my luck will run out. Maybe tomorrow on the battlefield if they drag me along, maybe here in camp if they don't. A human can only survive among monsters for so long, and yet there's a perversity to it. Part of me almost wants to see what happens when the Waaagh erupts, as if witnessing the orcs in full war fury might at least give some meaning to the misery. Or at least it would be a different way to die than the slow torment of captivity. I chuckle bitterly under my breath at that thought. I must be going mad to even think of finding meaning here. That's the satirical joke of this existence. To endure such horror that you start to rationalize it, even find twisted fascination in it. The orcs themselves would have a good laugh knowing a Humie is beginning to think a bit like them. Finally, exhaustion overtakes terror, and I drift into a shallow, uneasy sleep. The last sounds I hear as consciousness slips away are the distant growls of squigs dreaming in their pens and the rumbling snores of the orcs sprawled around dying campfires. My final thought is a quiet prayer. Emperor, if I wake tomorrow, grant me the strength to endure one more day in this Waaagh camp. And if I do not, then at least I'll be free of it. In the heart of this endless night of savagery, that is the closest thing to hope I have.